Thanks, you guys, for being patient and working through this. I know that, again, this hasn't been perfect, but I appreciate you doing what you can. I'm going to go over the homework here, and then I'm going to kind of teach a brief little lesson. And then in the back half of this class, I'm going to give you kind of a review sheet that you're going to do the stuff that we've been doing for a couple of days now. And that will be the way I'm going to check kind of your homework or see your understanding. So you'll be able to work with each other and kind of work on it to get it done. But I haven't been checking homework. I've just been going over it. And so I need a way to kind of find out what you get and what you don't get. It's not a quiz, but it'll be graded, and it will count for points. So I want you to make sure you're listening and paying attention. So what this worksheet was just simply about the idea of using coordinates to obtain sine, cosine, and tangent. And I'll just kind of go through some quick answers here, I guess. 6 and 8, of course, 6, 8, and 10 are the magic combination. And so y over r, x, and this is r over y. This is x over r, and r over x, the inverses or the reciprocals and so on. Now to obtain the angle, all we did is we took the sine value, we knew the ratio, we asked it to give us the angle, and it gave us 53.13. Now, maybe you forgot to do the angle. It mentioned to do that. I forgot to put a place for it. So you probably missed out on that, but let's make sure you know how to do that. In this case, let's see what we have here. -8 is left and -15 is down. When you square those, you get a positive 17. The radius or the hypotenuse will always be a positive value because it's generated through squaring numbers, which make positive values. One of the things I did here is maybe back here you'll notice I put this little bit all are positive because it's in quadrant 1. Over here you'll notice that when I get these answers, only the tangent-cotangent combo are positive. That's because we're in quadrant 3, and the cast rule says only tangent and its reciprocal, cotangent, would be positive there. Just maybe quickly looking at your numbers, -15 over 17, 17 over -15, and so on. Now watch how I calculate the angle this time. This is a little bit more work. I took the positive guy here, tangent, and I did the inverse of tangent is 15 over 8, and it gives me again a quadrant 1 angle. That's why you always pick the positive one. It'll always give you a quadrant 1 angle. Now that's its reference angle. We are not in quadrant 1. We're not up here at 61. We're down here. So what we do is we take our 180 and add the 61 to it to put us in quadrant 3. So you'll notice that I took the 61 and I added the 180. That puts me in the proper quadrant with the proper reference angle. And I get 241 as that angle. In the third question here in C, we notice that it's the cosecant, or the secant and the cosine that are both positive. You find your hypotenuse to be a 41 when you square 9 and you square -40 and add that together. You square root that, you get 41 exactly, which is quite nice. And then you put your numbers together as they go. You can just quickly check what those are. Maybe I can zoom in a bit. Let's try. It's doing everything but moving for me. There we go. You can kind of see your answers there. I'll just give you a second. Let me talk briefly about the angle again. I took the positive one of cosine here, and I did the inverse of that. When that gives me an angle, it gives me a quadrant 1 angle, a reference angle, and it gave me 77.32. Now that's it, but I need to be in quadrant 4, which means I'm going to take 360 and minus that reference angle. and I will get 282.68 as the actual angle that produces those values. The last one, it's a 3, 4, 5. In this case, it was -3, left 3, +4, up 4, and I get a 5 as the hypotenuse. You'll notice in that quadrant that the ones that are positive are sine and cosecant. Again, I just put in the values, and then I do the inverse, the inverse of sine, and it gave me an angle of 53. Now 53 is in quadrant 1, not in quadrant 2. So to get the proper reference angle, I take 180, subtract the 53, and I find out that the angle that would produce those numbers would be 126.87. So Pythagorean theorem, set up the relationships, and find the angle. I don't think any of that's too tricky. The next question says, what values do we expect for cosecant and secant? And our answer is greater than 1. And the reason for that is the hypotenuse is greater than the opposite or adjacent. So, and it's in the numerator this time. And so we expect values to be greater than 1. Quickly, let's look at our other answers here. You had cosine is 4 over the square root of 41, and then sine is 5 over the square root of 41. So those two were given to you. Tangent is there, easy, and then the other ones are just the flip of it. Quite simple. Here, same thing. You were given some of the ratios. They give you the 3 sides. And again, a couple of those were already given to you. Notice again that cosine and secant are the 2 positive values. That's because the CAST rule says C puts us in quadrant 4, where cosine and its reciprocal would be positive. Now this one only gave us one relationship, but cosine gives you the x number, that's the -6, and it gives us the r number, that's our radius, and so we would use the Pythagorean theorem to find, in this case, not the radius, but the y value, which is a +8. And now I can plug in my values. And in this case, again, in this quadrant, we would see sine and cosecant to be positive. And so that's who's positive. Final one of this type was a single relationship again. Tangent, which is the y value, which is the -15 here, over the x value, which is the -8 here. And 17 becomes our nice little hypotenuse, or our radius. And then these are the numbers. The last thing was just a little review of what we already kind of know here a little bit. Let's see if I can bring this up a little bit here for us. Maybe, maybe not. Let's see. The value is the sine of 23, and so that's a reference angle. So what I did is I found the other 3 angles and who would be positive where based on sine. Sine is positive in quadrant 1, and in quadrant 2 it's negative in quadrant 3 and in quadrant 4. So the one that would be a negative value would be 203, and another negative value would be 337. The last one is 65. Let me just pause this and make this move up. All right, so at 65, that's the reference angle, so I found the other angles. And then it requested a value that would give me the other positives. So the one positive happens in quadrant 1. With cosine, the other one, the CAST rule tells us it happens in quadrant 4. So that's why we see that happen. And then they wanted a negative answer, and I could have used the 115 or I could have used the 245. Now I want to cover something briefly in a video that will have you work on a little worksheet. But the majority of the time is I want you to kind of do a review over the things that you've done. You can work in groups to do that and help each other out. But you'll hand this in at the end of the period. I'd like to see what you've been learning and how well you're doing at this. And it will count, so make sure you do as well as you can.